In this video, I want to cover the steps involved in creating a plan to build your own backyard ecosystem pond with an intake bay and a bog filter. I will also create a video showing how to dig out the pond and connect all the components together. But this video will focus on how to size the filters and pumps so that you can design any sized pond. I've built 3 different sized ecosystem ponds in my backyard, and if I can do it, anyone can. I find that when the bog filter and intake bay are sized properly and you have the right amount of flow, clean clear water is very easily achieved. If you don't already know me, my name is Kev, and the aim of my channel and website is to help people build and maintain ponds without spending a fortune. If that sounds like something that interests you, feel free to subscribe and check out my website, Ozponds.com. Before we start, I'll briefly explain what an ecosystem pond is, what a bog filter is, and what an intake bay is. An ecosystem pond has rock, pebble, and plants, and as the name suggests, the idea is to create a complete ecosystem so that nature does most of the work. This means that the pond should be easy to maintain and it should look natural. A bog filter replicates the way that water is filtered in nature. In nature, water moves through, over, and around different media. That media is colonised by all sorts of different bacteria and microbes. A bog filter for a pond does the same thing on a smaller scale, using rock and pebble. And again, we want it to look natural, and we can add plants to help with filtration. An intake bay is where the pump or pumps will be positioned. Therefore, water is pulled into the intake bay. The intake bay pulls in surface debris from the main pond. This helps keep the surface of the pond looking good, but it can also reduce maintenance as a lot of that leaf litter isn't decomposing inside the pond. You'll still need to manually remove the leaves from the intake bay. So here's how the system works. The pumps are inside the intake bay, so water is pulled into this area. The water is then pumped to the bog filter, or in this pond, bog filters. The water rises up through the rock and pebble inside the bog filters, and then it overflows back into the pond via a small stream or waterfall. This cycle continues round and round. So before you start digging up the yard, it's a good idea to have a plan on what size bog filter and intake bay you'll need. To do this, you need to work out roughly the size or volume of your pond. I always prefer to size my intake and bog filters based on the pond's volume rather than the surface area. To calculate the pond's volume, I take the longest part of the pond and the widest part of the pond. I'll then draw a box or a rectangle around the pond shape and guess how much of the rectangle or box is filled by the pond. Then I'll use that to calculate the estimated surface area of the pond. I'll then estimate my average depth of the pond. Multiplying the average depth by the surface area gives me my estimated volume. I like to have all my measurements in metres, as it easily converts the volume to litres. 1 cubic metre equals 1,000 litres. To calculate into US gallons, you would take your surface area in feet, multiply it by the average depth, again in feet, and then multiply it by 7.48, and that will give you the amount of gallons. Now that we have an estimate on how much water the pond will hold, we can plan the size of the bog filter. As a general rule, if the pond is just for a few goldfish, I'll size the bog at 10% the volume of the pond. Large fish like koi, 15 to 20% of the volume. And then I'll go 25% or more if it's a pond that you know you'll swim in. In the example I've been working out for this video, the pond is just for a few goldfish, so we only need a 10% bog filter. Now that we know the size of the filter, we can figure out what size pump we need. I have a general rule that I'll size the pump at 6 times the volume of the bog. So in this case, I want a pump that delivers around 1500 to 1800 litres per hour. And I calculate this based on the empty volume of the bog before any rock and pebble is added. Often on larger ponds, I might tinker with this formula a bit, but this is a great starting number for most backyard-sized ponds. So now we know how big the bog filter needs to be for our pond and how much water we should move through the filter. However, 9 times out of 10, in an ecosystem pond, we would like to have a waterfall and maybe even a stream. Waterfalls and streams generally require higher volumes of water. I have another general rule that if I want to create a 30 centimetre wide waterfall, I need somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 litres of water per hour to work with. For something half the size, you can use half the flow, double the size, double the flow. You get the idea. So on the hypothetical pond I'm designing for this video, I only had a maximum of 1800 litres going to my bog filter. But if I would like to have a 15 centimetre stream and waterfall, I need at least 4,000 litres per hour to achieve that. So I have 2 options. I could use 2 pumps, one for the bog filter and one for the stream. Or I could use 1 pump and plumb it so the 1800 litres went into the base of my bog filter and the remaining water flowed over the top of the filter. I've shown how I set that up in other videos by using a regulator valve on my breather pipe to allow me to adjust how much water flows over the surface of the bog and how much flows into the base of the bog. You can connect a hose and measure the flow rate coming out of the breather pipe to get a good idea of how much water is entering the base of the filter, or you can just guesstimate. I'm lazy, so I'm a big old guesstimator. Running 2 pumps is the easiest option, but it will cost a bit extra because you need to run 2 plumbing lines. Often on larger ponds, the size of the bog filter will allow a decent sized stream and waterfall because there's much more water being fed into the larger sized bog. So on my hypothetical pond I'm designing, I'm going to use 2 pumps moving a total of 5,800 litres per hour. I could use a smaller pump for the stream or bring the total water volume to 4,000 litres, which would put me at my minimum flow rate. But for a 15 centimetre stream and waterfalls, I'm happy to be between 4,000 and 6,000 litres. So the 5,800 litres puts me up at the higher end, and it's always easier to create streams and waterfalls with more flow than less flow. All this is important because once we know the total amount of water that we are pumping, we can size the intake bay. Remember, this is where the pumps will be. So we want to size the intake bay so that it's big enough to provide plenty of water for the pumps, but small enough that it pulls in floating debris. I was taught that the intake bay should be sized to accommodate 1 minute worth of pumping capacity. So that means that I take the pumping volume and I divide it by 60. On this hypothetical pond design, I'm going for an intake bay that can accommodate just over 96 litres, and I'd just round that up to 100 litres. And on larger ponds, you might be adding jets, and you'll want those pumps inside the intake bay, so they would add to your total pump volume and therefore increase the size of your intake bay. I do have a PDF available for download on my website that helps you size the bog filter, intake bay, and work out how much rock you'll need, liner, pumping sizes, things like that. And if you think it's a bit too tricky, I can help you work out the sizes required. You can find a way to contact me via the website. But anyway, that's how I create a plan. Now I can start to work out the total amount of liner that I need. I can decide what I'll use as a bog filter. I can start looking at efficient pumps. I'll put a link in the description to what I consider to be good energy efficient pumps if you're interested. In the next video, I'll go through how I put everything together. I'll show 3 different ponds so that you can pick a method that will work for you, or it will at least give you an idea on how to tweak my systems and make them better suited for your personal situation. Anyway, I hope this video and the resources I've linked are helpful. If it was, feel free to tickle the thumbs up button. Thanks for watching. See ya.